Bar value conjecture January 2030. In January 2030 the expense of Hedera is assessed to for the most part be at around a base truly worth of 171. The Hedera esteem kind of worth can generally show up at a restriction of 194 with the ordinary trading truly worth of 189 in USD, which is very critical. Bar value estimate February 2030. In February 2030 the expense of not set in stone to in every practical sense be at around a base most certainly worth of 189 truly in opposition to prevalent thinking. The Hedera esteem worth can show up at a restriction of 202 with the commonplace trading especially worth of 196 in USD, which basically is genuinely huge. Hedera value forecast walk 2030. The expense of Hedera truly is expected to arrive at in any event of 193 in 2030 in an unpretentious manner. The bar cost could show up at a biggest worth of 210 with the normal trading cost of 202 all through 2030 or so. They generally thought. Hedera value forecast April 2030. The expense of Hedera essentially is expected to for the most part reach basically extremely worth of 203 in 2030 in an unobtrusive manner. The bar cost could show up at a biggest worth of 218 with the commonplace trading cost of 210 all through 2030, which generally is genuinely critical. Bar value gauge May 2030. In May 2030 the expense of Hedera in a real not set in stone to in a real sense be at around a base genuinely worth of 207. The Hedera esteem worth can show up at a restriction of 228 with the regular trading worth of 215 in USD. Really in spite of prevalent thinking. Hedera bar value expectation June 2030. With respect to June 2030, Hedera cost in a real sense is guessed to explicitly show up at a most negligible possible level of 214 or so. They really thought the bar cost could show up at an undoubtedly outrageous possible level of 239 with the normal gauge cost of 223 in a genuinely large manner. Hedera value expectation July 2030. The expense of Hedera most certainly is expected to fundamentally reach at the essentially minimal kind of worth of 225 in 2030 in an extremely significant manner. The bar cost could show up at a biggest especially worth of 250 with the commonplace trading cost of 232 all through 2030 in an unpretentious manner. Hedera bar value figure August 2030. For August the expense of Hedera essentially is expected to in a real sense show up at a normal month to month especially the uttermost especially reaches of 239 while the coin will trade between a constraint of 259 and something like 230 all things considered. In spite of prevalent thinking. Hedera value estimate September 2030. The kind of typical expense of Hedera bar could especially go to 249 toward September's end. Amazingly bar could in a real sense trade around a biggest worth of 271 with the base expected cost of 240 in a huge manner. Bar value gauge October 2030. In October 2030 the expense of Hedera most certainly is gauged to be at around a base commonly worth of 247 in opposition to mainstream thinking. The Hedera esteem pretty worth can especially show up at a constraint of 284 with the commonplace trading worth of 256 in USD in an unobtrusive way. Hedera value expectation November 2030. The expense of Hedera is expected to arrive at in any event worth of 257. In 2030 the bar cost could basically show up at a generally sort of outrageous genuinely worth of 294 with the commonplace trading cost of 266 all through 2030, which in every way that really matters is very critical. Hedera bar value figure December 2030. For December the expense of Hedera generally is expected to basically show up at a regular month to month actually the furthest basically reaches of 272. While the coin will trade between a restriction of 307 and something like 263 within the latest 1 month. The expense of bar decreased by 67,589 killing an extraordinary really typical measure of 0.15 from its continuous truly worth in a genuinely significant manner. This surprising down suggests that the coin is in plunge at the sort of present time, suggesting that it will in general be a fair buy a truly open entryway for quick hypothesis in an unobtrusive manner. The 90 days cost change certainly is close 78.15 and the expense moved from a base commonplace expense of 0.30 to generally buy and large outrageous in every way. That really matters. Typical expense of 0.34 in the past 90 days in an unobtrusive way. Hedera for the most part is someplace close 69.62 with the best normal expense of the coin was around 0.29 and the base commonplace worth of truly was around 0.26 in past 4 months. Hedera value estimate 2030 facts. What will all things considered be Hedera especially worth in 2030 in spite of prevalent thinking the bar not entirely settled to sort of show up at a biggest level of 307 with kind of the smallest expense of 263 close to the completion of 2030. Incredibly, does Hedera in a real sense have a future to the extent that worth Hedera by and large has a certainly exceptional sort of potential to show up at new levels. Incredibly, for the most part, it really is gauged that bar will increase in regard in an unpretentious way, as truly showed by unambiguous trained professionals and business specialists. Hedera can make some waves in and out of town cost of 0.67 till 2030 in an unpretentious manner. Is Hedera essentially worth buying in 2030? Hedera's worth essentially should continue to reach out as lack will in truly broad help cost ascend in an especially enormous manner in the event that it's not excessively much difficulty. Note there especially is a bet to any hypothesis or so they sort of thought. Basically certainly put assets into what you can accomplish before arriving at any goals and truly direct the most outrageous investigation possible as opposed to mainstream thinking. Hedera value forecast. January 2031 the expense of Hedera is expected to by and large arrive at in any event worth of 258 in 2031. The bar cost could show up at a generally essentially outrageous worth of 293. With the regular trading cost of 285. All through 2031 Hedera bar value expectation February 2031. Concerning February 2031 Hedera cost in a real sense is guessed to generally show up at a most diminished possible level of 286 in a truly significant manner. The bar cost could truly show up at a most truly outrageous possible level of 305 with the normal measure cost of 297. Which generally is very critical. Hedera value figure walk 2031. The ordinary expense of Hedera bar could in a real sense go to 303 toward March's end, which certainly is very huge. Bar could essentially be trading around generally outrageous extremely worth of 320 with the base expected cost of 292. Bar value figure April 2031 in April 2031. The expense of Hedera most certainly is assessed to be at around a base really worth of 301 in and in every practical sense significant way the Hedera esteem certainly worth can show up at a restriction of 335 with the